Hey everyone, welcome back to Crime Weekly News. I'm Derek Lavasser.
And I'm Stephanie Harlow.
We're here with another story in the headlines. This is they're never good, right? But this is it's a tough one. We're going to be talking about an announcement where prosecutors have decided to charge 3 women with the abuse, torture, and death of a 38-year-old autistic woman. Stephanie's going to be giving you all those details in a minute. But this is another tough one. This is the pro and con to doing Crime Weekly News, right? We're covering crimes in the headlines 99.9% of the time. Although we love engaging with you guys and talking to you, unfortunately, it comes with the job. It's not going to usually be about good topics. It's funny, when I was a cop, people would ask me, do you enjoy it? And it's like, well, that's such a weird question. Like I love what I do.
It's fulfilling, but
it's fulfilling and it's gratifying when we accomplish what we want. But you're never calling us when things are going well.
Mm-mm.
We're not getting called to the house party because things are going as planned. We're there because something didn't go the way it was supposed to. So it's tough.
And no one's sending Derek and Stephanie happy stories to cover.
That's right. So every story that we're going to talk about most of the time, although we try to mix in some stories where there's resolution or there's a result in a case.
Try to find something that's
with
like a little
DNA.
upbeat.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know you guys come here for the content, to hear about these stories, but I sometimes I do feel guilty to be the bearer of bad news, I guess. But with that being said, Stephanie, why don't you weigh in with the specifics of this case?
Yeah, so this is an article from True Crime Daily, and it says, according to a news release from the New Mexico Attorney General's office on February 27th, Angelica Chacon, Patricia Hurtado, and Luz Scott allegedly tried to drive Mary Malero, who's the victim, to Mexico in a white passenger van to seek medical treatment for her. And federal agents reportedly noticed that Mary Malero, who suffered from developmental disabilities, was severely dehydrated and drugged and had numerous open wounds, including chronic bed sores with exposed bone, bruises, and lacerations on various parts of her body, and ligature marks consistent with prolonged restraint. Federal agents tried to talk to Mary, but she was unable to speak. And the AG's office said that Mary Malero was subsequently transported to University Medical Center in El Paso, Texas, and she died from her injuries on April 7th. Now, according to the AG's office, Malero was part of the Developmental Disabilities Waiver Program in the state of New Mexico. And the New Mexico Department of Health contracted with At-Home Advocacy, otherwise known as AHA, which allows for caretakers to provide care for patients in private residential settings rather than through an institution. So 2 of these defendants, 2 of these people who were in the white van with Mary Malero, Chacon and Hurtado, were reportedly paid $5,000 a month through AHA and the New Mexico Department of Health to care for Mary, which is clearly what they did not do. They did the absolute opposite of that. It seems that they not only neglected her, but it kind of tortured her in ways. It's just absolutely awful because remember, Mary Malero has developmental disabilities. She's autistic. She was unable to advocate for herself. She was very vulnerable in this situation. So the Attorney General's office announced on May 18th that Chacon faces charges of abuse of a resident resulting in death, fake imprisonment, conspiracy to commit fake imprisonment, and failure to report. And she faces a maximum sentence of 19 years in prison if convicted. In my opinion, it should be more. You should get life for something like this. It was intentional neglect, in my opinion. And Chacon's live-in girlfriend, Hurtado, was charged with the neglect of a resident resulting in death, abuse of a resident resulting in physical harm or great psychological harm, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit false imprisonment, and failure to report. And if convicted, Hurtado faces a maximum sentence of 20 and a half years in prison. The other defendant, Scott, who allegedly provided the van and assisted with transporting Mary Malero through the state, was charged with false imprisonment and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. And this person faces a maximum prison sentence of 3 years if convicted. This is just absolutely terrible. And even the New Mexico AG, Raul Torres, said, quote, the abuse and neglect that she, speaking of Mary, endured was horrific, and the injuries she sustained are among the worst I have seen in my career as a prosecutor. This was torture. There's really no other word for it, end quote. I completely agree, which is why I don't understand why these people are getting off with, what I believe to be kind of light sentences for what happened. Like, you kept somebody in this house and you tortured them. And it seems very intentional and psychopathic, honestly. So I don't know. I wonder, did Mary have family? Were there people checking in on her? Was she alone in the world?
Clearly not. That's how this happens, right? You have a situation, and we see it a lot with children as well, where there's these government-assisted programs. There's these opportunists who find ways to take advantage of these systems. And in some cases, it's their responsibility through this funding that they're getting to take care of someone else, whether that's a child or someone who's older but incapable of taking care of themselves. It's clearly what you have here. They wanted the money, but not the responsibility. And they probably learned or found out that Mary didn't have anybody. So they saw an opportunity where they could take her, claim the responsibility for making sure she's okay, take the money that they were supposed to be using to give her the proper care that she needed, and using it for themselves and giving Mary, I don't even want to call it the bare minimum, just basically tying her to a bed probably 90% of the day.
Yeah, she was restrained.
Quote unquote, and I'm doing air quotes here, for her own good, and not giving her the proper care that she needed. And you can tell that by the bed sores, and again, there were points where you could see her bones. So there's levels to this, and there can be a subtle level of abuse where, let's say they're getting $5,000 a month, where you may have someone who's taking 50-60% of that and putting it towards their own clothes or their own shoes or what they want, and giving the other half to the person. So they're neglected. They're not getting the full amount that they're entitled to, but they're getting something. It sounds like this was an egregious case where I don't know if anything was going to Mary.
No, they were getting paid.
That's what I'm saying. They were getting paid, and none of that money was being used for Mary.
For her care.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe $100 a month for just the bare minimum amount of food.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I doubt any of it was being in. And
That's
honestly, it even seems more like negligent than just like, oh, we want the money, but we don't want the responsibility. What I mean is it seems less negligent and more purposeful.
No, it's more criminal.
More like, oh,
There's the premeditation
let's see how much we can hurt her, how much we can torture her, because.
Oh, you think that? You think it was deliberate?
It almost seems like, yeah, I do. I think it was deliberate. I think, once again, this is an issue of a vulnerable person, and we see it in senior homes all the time.
Yeah.
But it was an issue of a vulnerable person, and yes, somebody who wanted the money but not the responsibility, but also somebody who kind of had a little vindictive or sadistic streak to them. Because how can you do that to another human being and not?
Well, you're sick. You're a sick person. You're an opportunist, and you don't value other human beings the way you value yourself.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have nothing to say that wasn't the case. But at minimum, they were in it for themselves. She was more of a burden to them. They wanted to stick her in a room and forget she was there. And they pretty much did do that. And that's why and maybe when she started being more of a nuisance, that's when they started restraining her, because they're like, hey, we don't want her walking around. But yeah, this is.
And they drugged her, because it said that she was severely dehydrated and drugged, and lacerations on various parts of her body. Do you think they were accidental lacerations?
I think it could be a combination. It could be physical abuse, where they're actually striking her to try to gain control, compliance, or it could be just the restraints themselves, the actual straps they're using that could be causing some of those lacerations. I do want to say, we're talking about a specific incident here. That's how we usually do this. But as with many of these cases, there's something bigger here. You had mentioned at the top of the show that you wondered if she had family members or friends who were checking in on her. I would venture to say she didn't, because if she did, they would have noticed. A red flag would have been raised. So what I would say to everybody out there is, unfortunately, this is happening all over the country with elderly, with people with mental disabilities, and then children. So if you see something like this is where you need to notify law enforcement, make them aware of it, because they can do, which we did all the time, well-being checks, to just randomly stop by. Now, we need a search warrant to go in. However, if they're on a government-assisted program, although law enforcement may not be able to go in and do a search, in most cases, the government agencies in charge of overseeing those programs do not need the same level of paperwork that law enforcement would need. They don't need a search warrant. Basically, by these individuals accepting this money, they're usually agreeing to random surveys and interviews. One of the things we have in housing is Section 8. I think I've mentioned this before, where I own rental property, and as a landlord, Section 8 can come in basically with like 48 hours notice and do an entire inspection of my house, including interviewing the tenants to make sure that they're being taken care of the way they should be based on the money that they're getting from the state, and then using that money to pay for their rent. So these are things that, depending on who the person is who's being supervised, there's a government agency that's in charge of overseeing that. And it's very easy for us as law enforcement, or even for you, to find out who that agency is and to, at minimum, make an anonymous call so that they can come in, check it out, and maybe stop something like this from happening to them.
But do you feel like these agencies should be doing like random checks anyways? Regularly? Especially when the person may be autistic, nonverbal even, or,
Of course they should. But this is something, and I'm not giving them an excuse, by the way, but this is something like with a lot of government agencies, understaffed and oversaturated with cases. There's not enough employees to check all of these, tens of thousands of people who are getting this type of government assistance. I'm not making excuses here, but we know that a lot of these programs are underfunded, and therefore the amount of people on staff to go and do these in-person visits, you think about it, they got to drive out there, they got to set it up, should they be doing more? Of course. But I feel like they're very heavily understaffed, and that's why a lot of people out there, not even to this extreme, are able to take advantage of these government-assisted programs. And this is across the board, right? Think about how many government-assisted programs out there we see on a daily basis, individuals abusing those programs with no accountability because there's no oversight.
I just feel like somebody should be like on staff who just specifically does that. Like,
I'm sure there is.
Like
there's
goes
inspectors
around and just does surprise visits once a month so that there's accountability and they know that they're coming at some point. So I feel like if you know that they are coming definitely at least once a month, there's going to be far less abuse, right? Because it's going to be found out.
Right. I bet you if we checked how many times, I don't know how the duration of how long they were in charge of her care, but I bet you it was a pretty extensive amount of time, and probably nobody ever came by.
So it says the last AHA visit she had was in January.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's been a while.
Wow.
So we're in what, May now?
Yeah.
So 5 months.
But it looks like this happened in February though.
So she was seen in January, and then a month later she was in this condition. That's a bigger problem because that means these injuries that she had to her didn't occur overnight.
It says injuries to the victim were extensive and described by the University Medical Center as chronic wounds. The filed arrest warrant indicates that the victim was left in a bathtub in her own feces for days at a time, and according to medical professionals, had infected pressure sores resulting in septic shock. That is crazy. It's crazy that somebody could do that to another human being. Insane. Not only that, but a vulnerable human being who has, this disgusting. So it says a preliminary review of the available business records also indicates that AHA received nearly $250,000 to coordinate care and support for Malero in the 3 years before her death. According to records, the last at-home visit by AHA occurred on January 25th, 2023, 1 month before Malero was intercepted at the port of entry in El Paso. So yes, that is concerning because the hospital described her wounds as being chronic, right?
Yeah, this didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, and they're literally saying the last
problem.
at-home visit by AHA occurred on January 25th, 2023. So are they just not going? Are they just saying they're going and not going?
I'll tell you what, someone has got some explaining to do because I don't know how, as a trained investigator, you wouldn't go there and see the signs of potential abuse. And I would love to see this report to A, confirm that the person actually went there. B, if they did go there, what their report consist of? What type of observations did they make where they didn't deduce that this woman was being abused and taken advantage of? What did they report?
I feel like
in this
they didn't
report?
go. I feel like they just said they went.
Well,
how could you go?
So if that's the case, right, you could argue that in and of itself is a criminal offense, right? That's an argument that can be made. At minimum, it's termination of employment. But I would almost say that because if there was a false report filed by this individual, you could have some form of criminal charges pressed against them. It doesn't sound like that's going to be the case. So you could have a situation where the person went out there and just didn't do their job. And so I'm really hoping, although we probably will never know publicly, that person will
We should know publicly, by the way, because this is publicly funded. So
Agreed.
The taxpayers of New Mexico who are, and I mean, this might even be a federal program, but whatever, either way, the taxpayers have a right to know that the money that they're paying out of their hard earnings, their hard worked earnings, is going to somebody who's not doing their job properly and leading to like the death of another individual that's supposed to be protected. Like,
That's right.
We should know. If it's a state or like a federal, service like this, it should be an open book. There should be full transparency at all times.
I'm with you. And I hope we learn that if this investigator went there, if that's the specifics of this, a month earlier and didn't have anything to report that stood out to them, they're no longer working with that agency at minimum.
At minimum. And the AG Torres, urged a number of essential reforms to the administration of the DD waiver program, including increased staff and training for in-person inspections, to say the least. Mandatory health and safety inspections every 90 days. Well, that doesn't help because apparently one of these happened the month before, so that was not effective. Mandatory referrals to law enforcement for any substantiated case of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Why wouldn't that already be? Why wouldn't that already be a policy?
And I'd like to point out while we're talking about AG Torres, Mr. Torres, if you happen to see this or someone from your staff sees it, Jacob Landine, let's get on it. Let's work together. Let's get to the bottom of this because this is someone we mentioned last week.
Oh, yeah.
He is the person overseeing this case. The name sounded familiar to you guys. That's why. So hopefully someone from this.
Why can't he just say this is what's happening, guys? You're doing this. This isn't I'm strongly suggesting this. I'm urging this. It's this is what's happening. And this shit should be happening already. Mandatory referrals to law enforcement for any substantiated case of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. I kind of feel like that's already the law. Okay? I kind of feel like that's already the law. And if we shouldn't have to be putting that into reform. What?
Well, there's certain things that we don't have, these things that get you upset, they get us upset too. And you watching this or listening to this, you can't necessarily control that. But what you can do is what we said earlier, where you can be someone who makes a difference. If they're not going to do their job, be aware of your surroundings. If you live in a small community where you see something like this, where something doesn't look right to you and you get, you don't think that these individuals are taking care of this person or people the way they're supposed to be. When in doubt, call the local law enforcement agency. If they're not responsible for it, they'll contact the agency that is. Let them do a random check.
Yes,
and maybe you might stop something. Yeah, you might. The worst thing you could do is not say anything. There's nothing wrong with you calling, whether it's, telling them who you are or anonymously, and maybe making a difference. And not to keep referring to it, but this is kind of similar to the Jacob Landine case, where you had a neighbor, CPS and whoever else didn't really follow up on it the way they probably should have. But ultimately, that could have been the difference maker. Jacob could still be alive today if actions had been taken. So
if actions had been taken at that point, Jacob would be alive today, right? Because he would have been removed from the home where he was being harmed.
Exactly. So the only thing you can do is err on the side of caution. And if you're looking at something and it just seems off to you, or you hear about something that seems off to you, remember this little segment that we did here. Think about Mary and make that call. When you're on the fence.
One more thing too.
Of course, you can say as many things as you'd like.
Thank you.
It's your show.
Thank you. I don't think that they were taking her to Mexico for medical care, by the way. Okay.
God, no, they were trying to drop her off at the border.
They were trying to get rid of her.
Yes, of course.
Okay, because are we really supposed to believe that they're going to let her sit in her own feces and get sepsis for days in the bathtub? But now they're like, oh no, we can see bone. We've gone too far. Let's go get her some medical care in Mexico. No, they were trying to just drop her off somewhere and hope that the cartels took care of it.
I would agree with you.
Allegedly.
It's a sad story. Unfortunately, like I started off this show saying, hate to be the messenger on these, but I think the only way to learn from them is to talk about them. And obviously there's a lot of people that watch the show, and maybe this is the type of case that's going to make you more vigilant about your community. And that's really what it comes down to. We talk about understaffing, negligence, wherever you want to go with it. You can be your own force. You can make a difference. You don't have to act yourself. If you just want to stay out of it and just call your local law enforcement agency. Make sure to keep an eye on it, see if they actually follow up with it. And if in a week or so they don't, make another call again. If you're a pain in the ass enough, they will eventually go out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why you got to just do your own little investigation from a safe distance, and maybe you can help save someone's life. I don't want to be dramatic, but that's the reality of it.
No, it's not being dramatic. It's absolutely true. That we are supposed to take care of each other, right? There's bad people out there who aren't going to do that. There's bad people who aren't going to fulfill their obligation to humanity. But if more of us do, when you see something, say something. The same thing goes for like human trafficking. I cannot stress it enough. There are like websites that tell you the signs of human trafficking because it's not always obvious. But if you see something, say something because you might save someone's life. And if there's nothing going on, there's nothing going on. And then everyone moves on and they sort it out later. That's it.
Yep. Someone gets a little frustrated that they got called on and they move on with their life because they're still going to collect their check.
Yeah.
So that's really all we have. We appreciate you being here. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you have your notifications on. We usually put these Crime Weekly news videos out on Wednesdays, but it can be sporadic during the day. It all depends on how quickly we can turn it around. So if you want to know as soon as it drops, make sure you have those notifications on. As always, we appreciate you being here. If you're listening on audio for our audio episodes, our new series on Lori Vallow will start Friday on audio. And if you're only on YouTube, it'll be on Sunday. So make sure you have everything turned on. You'll be the first one to know. We appreciate you guys being here. Stay safe out there. We'll see you really soon.
Yeah, we will. Thank you so much.